Did you know that the amendment we celebrate giving all women the right to vote was not ratified by all the states until March 22nd, 1984? There were considerable struggles to overcome to get the 19th Amendment passed into law. It would take over 60 years before the 50 states would ratify the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. I had no idea that March 22nd, 1984 was when Mississippi ratified it the last time, and Alabama ratified theirs in 1953. In 1984, I had been graduated from high school for 2 years, and my daughter was born the next year. I had no idea that the right to vote did not pass fully in 1920. I know what a privilege it is and an honor to vote, and we should never take that for granted as an American, and especially as a woman. The struggles for women's rights started probably back in the 1820s and 1830s. Women had grown tired of just being property. They had no say. They had to be at home and be submissive to their husbands. They couldn't own property. They couldn't do anything without the husband's approval. All they could be was a wife and a mother. The Seneca Falls was the first convention of women. It was the first step on the road to receiving the right to vote. They passed the Declaration of Sentiments, was their agenda for the movement. And after that, it was parades, it was protest, hunger strikes for years, almost 8 years before they really, well, in 1912, Theodore Roosevelt's party endorsed the women's suffrage movement. And that was the beginning of putting women's rights on the national level of support. After that, then it became known throughout America. And then in about 8 years, the 19th Amendment was passed on August 18th, 1920. The 19th Amendment states, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." But after it was passed, it was mostly white women that could vote because they were American citizens. Women of color weren't granted the right to vote because of racism and the lack of citizenship, probably the lack of education, and that they weren't property owners. Native Americans began to be allowed to vote about 1924, and then Asian Americans in about 1943. Although not all states would allow people of color to vote until the Voting Rights of 1965 was passed. Who was a year old then? And still, Mississippi had not passed theirs until 1984. That's a very, very long and horrendous road for women. This Constitution was established to protect our constitutional rights, and it can be amended by individuals in the government. We do not have to vote, but as women, it is our right and our privilege to do so. If we want to say anything about our government, we should exercise our rights to vote. We women across the country work so hard to establish our legal right to vote so that we could have a say in the issues that will come before the legislature. And we should never take that privilege to vote for granted. We should take time to study what our legislators are proposing before we vote. What our great-grandmothers had done for us was lay a pathway for us to have a right in our lives. And we should not take that for granted. And we should pass that on to our daughters and sons.